A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
You know, a federal election is on the way. We might not know the exact date yet, but it's getting pretty close. In a year when life is forecast to get a whole lot harder, we might be asking some important questions of our politicians and candidates on all sides. Well, today, some insight from one of Australia's best-known conservative political leaders, conservative political senators, for his take on what's coming. And as a Christian, you may be more deeply aware of a wave of woke policies that have swept many of the common-sense Christian values that we hold to away, those values that have created the sort of harmony and prosperity for our nation. Senator Matt Canavan is our special guest this hour. I'm going to be asking him what he thinks is at stake and how important the upcoming federal election is for our nation. He's been representing his state of Queensland for the National Party since 2013. He's a former Minister for Resources and Northern Australia, and this time he's not up for re-election as his term extends through to 2028. Matt Canavan, a special welcome along to 2020.
Good to be with you here, Neil. Hope you're having a good day too.
Thank you, Matt. Hey, tomorrow is a very important day, and maybe it's a very timely opportunity for us to be talking today, so far as, what's at stake, because a federal budget to be handed down tomorrow night. Some of us thought we might not get to have a federal budget because there could have been an earlier election. What are your thoughts around the fact that the budget is scheduled for tomorrow night, but no election date has been called yet?
Look, Neil, I do think it's a bit of a risk to our country because budget's typically simply a platform for governments to spend more of your money, and perhaps no bigger platform is there than a budget just a week or so from an election being called. We've already seen the Labor Party this year commit to something like $40 billion of new spending, and I think we might see a bit more tomorrow night. And ultimately, that's all of your money. That's everyone out there's money. We don't have the exact figures for last night. Won't have those until 7 o'clock. But from the last update on our budget we had just before Christmas, we now owe everybody across Australia owes $37,000. Every Australian's $37,000 in debt under this government. So that's a sobering figure that, and you wonder what we all get for that. And it's just growing and growing and growing years ahead. Indeed, in that last budget update, over the next 4 years, which is the budgets are usually forecast over 4 years, over the next 4 years, we're due to borrow another $140 billion, taking us over $1 trillion in debt for the first time in Australian history. This has been a time where we've actually had very high commodity prices. We've had a relatively strong economy, but this government's been spending more money than any government outside of COVID or the GFC this century, actually any government ever in history outside of those two major events.
Matt, we can come to some of those issues, and no doubt debt is going to be one of those significant things we might even enlarge on a little. But talking about tomorrow night's budget, and of course there'll be a budget reply, Peter Dutton, on Thursday night, I can't help but think that this is a very, very important week because tomorrow night's budget is going to be a little bit like the Treasurer setting the scene for an election and almost like an election launch. No doubt they'll all be in electioneering mode, and then there'll be an important reply on Thursday night. This is an important week to be watching the politics, isn't it?
Oh, look, no doubt it is. And, I wish more Australians followed the politics closely. I think many Australians are not happy with the direction of their country and how we're going. A lot of people are struggling out there, but I can also understand there's a fair amount of cynicism about the political process and what it will do. Especially, as I say, I think most of what we'll see tomorrow night is simply cash handouts, cash splashes to try and bribe people almost to give the Labor Party another go. What we probably won't hear a lot about tomorrow night is the record of the current government. Just 3 years ago, this government was elected and they promised to cut your power bills by $275. Obviously, that has not happened. They've make up for that by handing out your taxpayer money back to you in an electricity rebate. But keep in mind, businesses in this country use 4 times the power than households do. and not many of those businesses get access to these subsidies, or they're not very much of a subsidy. And so what happens is those businesses have to pass on those higher energy costs to you. And that's why things are getting so expensive in the grocery store, at McDonald's. So it's like $5.40 for a cheeseburger now. It's crazy. And a lot of that's because we've lost control of our energy system. You won't hear too much about that tomorrow night from this government because they haven't done what they promised. They promised to build 1.2 million homes over a 5-year period. At the moment, they're going to be lucky to get to 900,000 at the current rate of growth over that period. And that shortage of housing is also leading, of course, to enormous difficulties for young Australians in particular to buy their first home. Even just rent a home is very difficult for many people now. It's a shocking state of affairs. So we need change in this country. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow night. I'm not going to be holding my breath for that, but maybe you'll have a better chance on Thursday night with Peter Dutton.
Certainly, energy and housing, those are going to be important elements, aren't they? Come back to debt and deficit for a few moments. One of the things that the Labor Party will be crowing about will be the fact that they've been able to return some surpluses. But deficits for the long-term, medium to long-term future look like they are coming. Those who might be including criticism on all sides into the mix might even look to the former government that you were a part of for running up a lot of spending during those COVID years and creating all sorts of national debt. So there is some sense in which the politics are going to be about what happens in the here and now, but everyone on both sides has been a part of the problem, haven't they?
Well, look, no doubt there was a lot of money spent during COVID, and I'm happy to go into the detail of that. I mean, it was spent for a reason, and we had to support businesses that government policies had forced to close. In fact, of course, most of the times the governments that were forcing those closures, putting people out of work, or actually state governments made those decisions under their various public health acts. Now, the federal government has the finances and the ability to step in there and help, and that's what we did do. Now, look, at times I was a little critical that we probably locked down for too long and kept things closed beyond what was sensible. But I don't know. I think most people, I myself included, cut a fair amount of slack to governments operating during a once-in-a-century pandemic. You're not going to get everything right. I do wish we had a proper Royal Commission into this so we could look back at what we did do wrong. It seems strange to me that we haven't done that, given we seem to have Royal Commissions on every other thing in this country these days. But look, that's past history now, and I'm not saying everything was perfect.
Matt, is that part of a coalition platform that there would be a far-reaching Royal Commission if there's a change of government coming?
No, it's not part of our platform per se. I must say it was part of Anthony Albanese's platform. They'd actually recommended a Royal Commission when they were in opposition in the Senate inquiry that they chaired, that Katie Gallagher, the Finance Minister, now chairs. She recommended a Royal Commission into COVID. I've been pushing for it for a long time. I moved a bill to establish actually I can't establish a Royal Commission as a senator. I can establish what's called a Commission of Inquiry, which is exactly the same powers, etc., just not something done by the sovereign, because the Parliament doesn't control the sovereign, of course. So that did get a lot of votes here. Didn't pass. I'm here in Canberra talking to you, and so just around the corner from where I'm sitting. We moved that in the chamber late last year, and it didn't pass, unfortunately, and my side of politics did not support it. So, look, I think that's a real shame. A lot of people were hurt during COVID. There were understandable disagreements about different settings of policies. People were forced to take vaccines, lose their jobs. We'd never seen anything like it in this country outside of wartime. And we did have a Royal Commission after the Spanish flu 100 years before. It would have seemed to me just good government to have a proper review where people can be subpoenaed, where you take evidence under oath, like you do during a Royal Commission or through a Commission of Inquiry that I would have established. So, look, I don't think it's too late. There's not that much more time, perhaps, to get it done before it's too far back in the rearview mirror. But I will push again after the election to give it another go. But unfortunately, that's not on the ballot at this election right now.
The intention of our conversation today, just to really ask your opinion, and no doubt there'll be listeners who are saying, well, anytime we ask politicians, there's always going to be that flavour that comes through, and a lot of Christians will recognise you. You're well known, certainly in conservative media circles, for your outspokenness on so many different issues. But I want to ask you, Matt, what is at stake, do you think? And this is a big question, and there's lots of dimensions to it. But if we're talking about big things, I know that there are some who talk about civilisational moments. The importance of an election that's coming up like this, continuing on a trajectory under the ALP, the possibility of a power-sharing arrangement with the ALP and the Greens. Some are saying, well, this is a civilisational moment. If one side doesn't win in entirety, if there's minority governments, there's hung parliaments, what are your thoughts about what is at stake?
Look, I'm not going to be as dramatic as that. I think we'll continue as a country regardless of the result, and I'm very optimistic about the future of Australia. But I do think it's a major decision, especially for our wealth and prosperity as a country. We are, I think, on the precipice here of losing the lucky country status. We've been very, very lucky in the last 30 years or so. We haven't really had a proper recession in my lifetime in the workforce, my generation's time in the workforce. There was a technical recession during COVID, but the government spent so much money, as we just discussed, that actually household incomes, on average, not everybody's, but on average, household incomes went up during that recession. So it wasn't really keenly felt. So look, I worry that we are cruising for a bruising right now. Our productivity's in free fall, our standard of living in free fall. We are falling behind other countries. Other countries are overtaking us in terms of investment attractiveness. We've squandered another mining boom that's fast receding now. So we've got some really key decisions to make. And as you highlighted there, the worst outcome for me, as bad as I think this current government has been, if we end up with a sort of Labor, Green, Bobcatter, Teal government, I call it the LGBT government. If you end up with this LGBT government, things get a lot worse because it's just a complete disaster. They will go more radical, more crazy, less sensible on things like energy, housing policy, etc. We end up with crazy policies like rent controls that don't work, and there's artificially attractive, superficially attractive, but do not work. And so that's my concern. And really, the only way to avoid that is to, in my view, is to vote for a Liberal National Party. And I'm sure your listeners aren't necessarily happy all the time with the LNP. I'm not happy all the time. I get frustrated at times, even part of the team. But there's no doubt in my mind that a strong LNP government would be much better than a weak, divided, all over the shop LGBT government. So the LNP is the better choice, in my view, especially there in that lower house to form the government and change the direction of this country. But look, I don't want to. Every politician says, this is the most important election, rah, rah, rah. But look, we'll probably get on to other issues, but I still actually do believe that, mostly what's most important in your life is your family, your community, your church. You can have a lot of influence in those things too. Politics is important, plays a really important role. It's my job, and I am very honoured to be here. But my job as a father is a lot more important than my job as a senator.
Life, culture, and current events from a biblical perspective. 2020 on Vision.
Our special guest this hour is Senator Matt Canavan, and he's talking to us today from Canberra. Our talkback line is open on 1-800-316-316. You might like to help direct where our conversation goes. What are the policies that you're interested in and the perspectives that might come from a Nationals senator who's not up for re-election this time around? He's in the middle of his term. But 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. Matt Canavan, you're known as a person of Christian foundations and faith. I'm going to just give you an opportunity here to share with our listeners where that foundation comes from and your own thoughts on Christian faith. We know that you've got a pro-life foundation in your life, but talk to us about your faith.
Look, I'm a practicing Catholic. I was raised as a Catholic and went to a Catholic school. I think I'm very lucky to have had that upbringing. And at different times in your life, faith's more important than others. And I suppose it was when I got married and had children that started to really reflect and think a little bit more about what it means to believe in God. And obviously it's a very personal thing, but it's something that always grounds me. And I don't pretend to be any kind of perfect individual, but I do find that it's useful in life, and I think obviously important in the afterlife to think about something that's bigger and better than you. To not believe that you have the answers to everything, or that everything is as simple as just what you see, feel, and touch. Because once you can think about there being something, a higher force, higher meaning, it puts everything in life in perspective, and it definitely reduces the stress you have in life. Because I try to trust that God's got a plan. Whatever happens, whatever disaster befalls me, there is some plan out there that I'm not wise enough to know about. So best thing to do is just knuckle down and keep going. So I'm very lucky, I think, to have had that upbringing, that belief. I mean, I'm not someone in a missionary role seeking to convert lots of other people, but I also try and push back against the idea that somehow religion should check itself at the door of the Senate chamber. I've never felt that. I think that the Christian worldview, other religious worldviews, have very insightful things to say about moral, ethical issues, which often do crop up. Not every debate in this place, but often, very often, there are moral challenges here about how to weigh up different people's rights, different people's beliefs and values. And usually those moral debates are the most interesting ones. They get to the heart of what it is to what we believe, what makes up a good society. So the idea we just whitewash religious viewpoints on that, I think, cuts us off from some of the best parts of our heritage as a Judeo-Christian society, and leads us down some very narrow, often utilitarian pathways that I think typically, at least in the last 100 years or so, have led to lots of disasters in the modern world. So
Matt,
I'm always a very strong advocate for religion to be part of politics and part of the political discussion.
when you take your religion into the Senate chamber there, you're being prejudged, you're being compartmentalised, and lots of listeners will remember the Tony Abbott experience because he, just like you, comes from that Christian Catholic foundation in faith, and when you are named as Catholic, and it's no less if you're Protestant, by the way, but to have a pro-life perspective on the world, to recognise that people are valuable because they're made in the image and likeness of God. You carry that because you claim to have a Christian faith. You can't escape that, but it's not easy to deal with, is it? Because your critics have the knives out for you because they think that you're already positioned when it comes to any policy debate around life, whether it was the Babies Born Alive bill, which you've been a real advocate for, and I know that lots of listeners will honour you for that, but issues around euthanasia and the challenging things that are ahead. How hard is it for you carrying that Christian faith into the Senate chamber?
Yeah, look, I don't find it particularly hard, Neil. I might be just different. I actually like people attacking me. I'm a little bit of a contrarian. Yep. So, look, and Jesus told us that we'd be mocked, we'd be condemned. Look, I take it as a badge of honour if people want to attack me for my religion. But you come back to the root things that you just mentioned there, that ultimately what that Christian worldview has at its heart that is most relevant often for the political debates I'm involved in is that we do believe that every individual human being has inherent value. Now, I do believe that value is gifted by God, but to some extent, in the practical sense, pragmatic sense of how that impacts how I approach debates, how that happens is not so important. I believe it, but it's not that important. But to believe that every individual has inherent value. So when you come to debates about healthcare, and not just, obviously the abortion issue, euthanasia is where it, I suppose, gets as pointy as possible, but it cuts across lots of debates about how we provide healthcare, how we provide education to people, how we value people in the workplace. All of these things have impacts on people's dignity as a human being. And I do think that cultures and societies that are organised around a basis of of respecting particular rights that an individual has in those contexts tend to do better or tend to deliver better results compared to, say, a very secular, materialistic, utilitarian view, which would tend to potentially open up the possibility of trading off someone's rights or dignity as a human being to potentially, and in theory, deliver a greater good for a greater number. I think that worldview has been bankrupt and led to lots of destruction. So, that I think that's inherent in our heritage as a Judeo-Christian society, and it's not just a Christian concept; goes back into Jewish texts as well, and some other religions have a similar viewpoint. But we've come from that Judeo-Christian heritage, and I think we've been at our best as a society when we've stayed true to that, whether it's through doing things like ending slavery, improving conditions for workers through unions have done good things over the years, notwithstanding some of their more modern and recent nefarious activities. But that's where we should find. We should always trying to find that heritage.
I know that listeners will be impressed that you even draw attention to the Christian foundations of the trade union movement here in Australia and how some of those may have gone astray. Matt Canavan, Nationals are a coalition partner, and when an election comes around, I imagine either everybody pulls together or there's some freedom to have some levels of variance. When you think of your say on all of the issues that are confronting Australia, you've got to be in lockstep with your partner somewhere, but are you comfortable to have some variance around how election issues evolve?
Generally speaking, yes. There's a high degree of unity between the Nationals and Liberal parties on the major policy settings before the election. For example, we've pushed very hard as a Nationals party to introduce something called divestiture laws into our competition laws that will allow the competition authorities in Australia to break up big companies if they're hurting small businesses too much and consumers too much. These laws exist in almost every other developed country in the world. We don't have them here. So Liberals have agreed to that. Some Liberals were a bit worried about that, but they've agreed, and we're taking that forward as a joint platform, so that's fantastic. Same on nuclear energy. But look, I've always held my right as a member of the Liberal National Party to have my own views, express those, be upfront with my colleagues about those, sometimes vote different ways. We spoke about that earlier in the Senate. And I think it's a great thing about the Liberal National Party that we're not just a bunch of robots. In the Labor Party, if you step out of line just one iota, you're kicked out of the party. We saw that with Senator Fatima Payman last year. But in the Liberal National Party, you're actually electing a bunch of human beings. And mostly we agree, of course. That's why we're in that party. That's why I'm a member of the party. Sometimes, of course, a group of human beings, and there's just under 100 now, members of the Liberal National Party room. When you get about 100 people together, you're going to get some different views sometimes.
Of course you are.
Understand that, reflect that, and are honest about that.
Taking calls, 1-800 316 316. Let's hear from Vince, who is in Brisbane. Hey, Vince, welcome along.
Yeah, hi, Neil. Morning, Neil. Morning, Senator. Look, the call. I'm absolutely against this whole catastrophic climate change scam narrative. And with Anthony Albanese, if he was saying he was going to cut, electricity bills while we still got that millstone around his neck, that was never going to happen. But what I want to highlight is something I found very recently. There is a depopulation agenda embedded in this scam. I know it because I saw a 2017 video on a Dutch YouTube channel, environmental channel, where they interviewed this American academic, Dennis Meadows. He's a member of the Club of Rome. This is all verifiable. And he was saying, I've time-stamped it. He says we've got to cut the global population. He said from, say, 8 billion to 1 billion, or he said at least 2 billion. But he said we've got to do it at least in a very peaceful and civil manner. I kid you not.
Okay, Vince, let me just, I'll get the Senator to pick up on this thought, because some of these things can fall into the realm of, like, this is some sort of conspiracy theory, a depopulation agenda. I know, Matt Canavan, you've got your own views on the birth rate in Australia and such things, but what are your thoughts here for Vince in Brisbane?
Yeah, well, Vince, I suspect that particular individual didn't volunteer himself to start the depopulation of the country, but there are some crazy people out there who think and just glibly say, we've got 8 billion people in the world now, so that's almost decimation. Actually, it's worse than decimation, isn't it? 1 in 8, 7 in 8, sorry, would have to go from the world. Well worse than decimation. It just beggars belief that people have these views and they're given credible platforms to espouse them. Now, I'm not going to accuse every person who wants to take action on climate change of having those views, but there's no doubt there are some people behind this agenda that have very, very radical positions on things that almost all Australians would object to and be horrified by. And I do think there is some people who are over-exaggerating the impact of climate change to pursue their own political goals and agendas. They're scaring our children, making things sound apoplectic when we do not need when we do not need to panic about this situation at all, in my view. We can take some sensible action. We can do things more efficiently. Sure, we should be doing that, but we shouldn't be punishing Australians with the kind of policies we have right now that are just pushing up the price of energy. Now, on depopulation generally, it's not a conspiracy. We are depopulating as a country. Our birth rate is only 1.5 babies per woman now. It's very, very low, even lower than some European countries now. And if you just do some basic math here, when you have a birth rate of 1.5, you divide it by 2. You divide by 2 because only women can have babies. I think that's still the case, Neil, and even though modern science is evolving, I'm pretty sure only women can have babies. You divide it by 2, you get 75.75, you get 75%. And so each generation of Australians, with that birth rate, will be roughly 75% the size of the generation before. And that means in one generation we'll have 21 million Australians left. Then we'll have 15. And then within 3 generations, just 75 odd years away, we'll have just 11 million Australians descended from those here today. It's a stunning and shocking statistic. And, the only way to fix that is to bring in heaps and heaps of people, which I don't think anybody wants, to change the whole character of this country. And so I'm just belling the cap. This is a major issue. And if we don't fix it soon, it'll be too late to do anything about it.
These are challenging times. Vince in Brisbane, thank you so much for your call. 1800 316 316. Our talkback line is open. You might want a perspective here from Senator Matt Canavan. Let's take another call. Chris is in Melbourne. Hello, Chris. Welcome.
Good day, Neil and Senator. Just going on that same theme, conspiracy, I just hope the Nationals and everyone will support Senator Gerard Rennick in his, vaccine inquiry thing, because that's all about Depop. Also, why is all the governments in the world listening to Bill Gates, who we believe is a eugenicist? Why are they giving him such credence? Because really, it's not Bill Gates they're listening to. They're listening to the WEF and the WHO and UN and all those other organisations behind him.
Good thoughts there, Chris. Perspective here from Matt Canavan.
Yeah, well, I've raised it earlier in the show that not only do I support an inquiry into vaccine issues and COVID more generally, I moved that inquiry in the Senate late last year. Gerard did support that. As I said earlier, I haven't managed to get all of my colleagues on board. I'll have another effort after the election, so I'll do what I can to bring justice to the people that were harmed during this terrible period. In terms of Bill Gates, WEF, all these people, look, I think their standing has taken a hit. I sort of saw COVID up close, and I just want to stress to people, I didn't see any strings being pulled. It's not like there's one individual or one organisation just telling a Prime Minister what to do, and that's what they do. I think it's a little bit more complicated than that. And if you had a look at what governments did during COVID, they often just responded to the mob panic. Palaszczuk was probably the apogee of this, that she'd just poll the Queensland people every night, and she did whatever they thought they would. And it's hard to remember now, but people got so panicked they did actually support. The majority of people supported vaccine mandates and all these terrible things that we probably reflected on. And it shows, the dangers of mobs. I think a lot of this comes from the media. And yes, there may be some people influencing the media, pushing particular narratives on social media, etc., that are having an impact. But it's not quite as simple as some individual or even organisation overseas calling all the shots. So the antidote to that is that we've got to combat that misinformation, if you want to hate that word, but we've got to combat these lies and the panicked people online in real time and do that. And look, I've got a lot of time for what Elon Musk has done on X. I think that's had a big impact. You can see the new US administration's pulling back on stuff that pulled out of the WHO. I mean, the WHO should be either abolished or massively reformed. This is an organisation that within weeks of COVID becoming real in February 2020 was saying it can't be spread airborne as an airborne disease. They were defending the Chinese Communist Party. They were suppressing any idea that it was manufactured in a lab. They should have no authority whatsoever anymore, especially under the current leadership. The guy leading the WHO was the same guy that oversaw that catastrophe in early 2020. So it just beggars belief that there's not change there. Maybe there will get some change with what Donald Trump's doing. That would be a great thing.
Chris in Melbourne, anything further to add?
No, thank you. He's answered it pretty well. Thank you.
Okay, fabulous. Chris, thank you so much for your call. Just before we take another call, stay with this birth rate for a few moments. Depopulation agendas, some levels that some people are saying are conspiracy theories. The remedy for us having only 1.5 babies per woman in Australia is immigration. And just interested in your perspective here, so far as the masses of people that have been coming to Australia. You mentioned, Matt Canavan, the cultural changes that come along with that. What are your concerns around those cultural changes when you've got people coming from different religious, cultural experiences and bringing those to Australia without any alignment with a set of Australian values that might maintain the sort of harmony that we've seen with the Christian values of the past? Any thoughts here?
Well, I just fear we're taking in too many people too quickly here. Under this government, the last 2 years since we reopened our borders from COVID, well, the 2 full years, been about 3 years now, but we've got 2 full years of data available. We've taken in 500,000 people per year on average in net terms. Some there's taken in more than that. Some Australians leave, but in net terms, 500,000. We're only building 170,000 homes a year. So just on a purely pragmatic basis, we do not have the homes to house these people. And often what happens is even Australians end up not being able to have a house. We've got 10 cities in our major capitals, which is just absurd. It's a national embarrassment that a country with our wealth, our prosperity, our resources can't put a roof over all of the heads of people. That alone should be enough to pull back on the amount of immigration we're taking in. But I also believe, look, I'm a descendant of migrants. My nonna and nonna came here from Italy after World War II. At the time, they had to assimilate. They had to learn English. They went and moved to a very small country town in Ayr in North Queensland. Nonno cut cane, worked hard. There's no welfare, he had to just provide for his family and himself. And they became Australians, very proud Australians. And so I have no problem with migration at a moderate level, at a reasonable level, much, much lower than what we've got today. But it has to be at that moderate level so we can properly assimilate people and people don't end up in ghettos. And of course, there should be an obligation. If you're going to come here and you're going to be and you want to be an Australian citizen, you have to become Australian. You have to adopt our values and principles. You have to, as it might be, speak our language, learn to speak our language. I'd do the same. If I wanted to migrate to another country, I'd even if it wasn't a Christian country, I'd try and be respectful of the norms and practices that another country had. Be a guest in their country, at least to start with, and we've got to re-establish that principle. That coming here is fine, but you don't come here to change our country. You come here to be part of it, and it should change you if there is that need. But we seem to have lost this idea of multiculturalism, which I think it's just a word, so don't want to get too hung up on words. But there shouldn't really be a need for multiple cultures in Australia. There's one culture, Australian culture. Sure, we've got all our own practices. You can eat your own food and practice your own religion. All those things are fine. But we do have a unifying Australian culture which believes in the rule of law, believes in equality between the genders, believes in a fair go for everybody. And we should defend that. We should defend that to the death because it's at the bedrock of why we've got probably the most harmonious, peaceful, prosperous country in the world.
1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. Amber is in Augusta in Western Australia. Hey, Amber, welcome.
Oh, hello there. Oh, I'm just so grateful for this conversation. And I really admire Matt Kavanagh because he speaks out on such difficult issues, but he just sticks to his gun, and I just really appreciate it. And I'm just so happy that Donald Trump's in and how he's brought such good things in straight away. Like saying there's only two genders, male and female.
So is there something that you would ask Matt Canavan as our guest this morning?
Well, I'm really concerned about the amount of wind farms that they're proposing to put in WA in particular. and absolutely disgraceful. And this whole climate change rubbish. I don't know. Chris Bowen is just dreadful. We just can't get Albanese back in. That's all I'm saying. It's just dreadful.
Matt Canavan, what are your thoughts here for Amber?
Yeah, look, Amber, I hear you, and I hope it's not too bad over there. I've got the same problem in my backyard in central Queensland. They're just popping up wind turbines all over the place, and they're destroying a lot of pristine, beautiful environment in the process. It's very strange to me. I didn't really get involved in politics to be an environmentalist. I love the environment, love our bushland, but I suppose at the time I started 10 years or so ago, I thought the problem was that we were being too crazy on some environmental issues, and we needed to be pro-development and not just too one way. But now I'm actually fighting these former greenies who I used to fight over about coal mines, and they're the ones wanting to bulldoze entire forests, chop off entire mountainscapes. Like in what's happening in my part of the world in central Queensland is they're literally blowing up the top of mountains to create a flat pad to put these massive monstrosities on. Then when they do that, all that sediment ends up running off the mountain and going into the Great Barrier Reef. And if you're a farmer in the valleys below, you'd go to jail for cutting down too many trees. But apparently, if you put this word renewable in front of your name, you've got complete license to just rape and pillage across the environment. It is absolutely disgraceful. And someone up there once said to me, which I've always held to my heart, is that we're not going to save the polar bear by killing the koala bear. That's what's happening right now. We're killing koalas in central Queensland, in my part of the world, and doing so for no environmental benefit. Not going to change the temperature of the globe one iota. It's pushing up our power bills, making our power system less reliable, killing our manufacturing industry. Why are we doing this madness? It's got to stop. That's why the Nationals Party have been at the forefront and calling on a moratorium on these developments, these large-scale developments. Fine if you want to put solar on your roof. I don't have a problem with it. Go for it. But this sort of stuff that destroys our environment, we should stop right now and take a pause and work out how we are going to do any of this without destroying our environment before it's too late.
Amber in Augusta in WA. Amber, thank you so much for your call. Our talkback line open, 1800 316 316, running short of time. We could probably squeeze another one in. But I do want to ask you, perhaps for the last thing we might have to talk about here, so we will have to put a line under some calls, religious freedom issues. There are some freedoms we've enjoyed in Australia, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, academic freedom, then the freedom of political communication. All of these things appear to be under threat, and religious freedom really right there at the centre of it all. From your perspective, Matt Canavan, coming into an election campaign, is religious freedom likely to be somewhere in the mix? Because my suspicion is that for Christian voters, if religious freedom is something that someone stands for to defend, there may be much more of a chance you'll win their vote. Any thoughts here for the issues around religious freedom?
Well, look, both parties remain committed to establishing a Religious Discrimination Act, which would seek to protect the freedom of religion in Australia. The current government has not done anything to progress that. Admittedly, the former Morrison government tried. We tried our best. It did fail. Didn't get through the House of Reps at the time, but we did at least put a bill forward that this government hasn't done. So, look, I've been continuing to bang the drum now there on this, but from opposition, there's not much we can do. We're not going to get a bill through, obviously, the House of Reps without the Labor Party support right now. So we need your help and support, I think, to change the House of Reps. So we do have the numbers to do that. That's why we need that change. I think it'll only happen under a coalition government. Now, that bill won't be a panacea for everything, but it will enshrine those protections that I think are very important. I don't think it's too dramatic to say that the freedom of religion is the wellspring from all our freedom. Modern freedoms come from. If you go back to British history, it was actually some very violent wars, unfortunately, fought in favour or to protect freedom of religion, which ultimately ended up with the creation of a parliamentary democracy, the creation of representative parliament, the restriction on powers of monarchs and kings, and it did, from my perspective, as I spoke about my faith, eventually Great Britain legalised Catholicism even as well. It took them to the 19th century, but they got there. So, that to me is very, very important. And if we lose that, it just, I don't know, it might just be a cornerstone that sees many more of our freedoms collapse as well.
We'll just squeeze in one more call. Laura in Rockhampton. Hey, Laura, welcome along.
Hey, Laura.
Hi, Neil. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Very good. What are your thoughts, Laura?
Yes, I am from Matt's side of the world. I'm a very big fan. Thank you for all the work you're doing. I just wanted to go back to the birth rate questions. We have 5 kids and trying to do our bit there. But I'm wondering what policies the LNP or Australia could look at to implement to help the birth rate.
Okay, Matt, we haven't got a lot of time here, but yes, in a nutshell.
I'll try and be quick, but great, Laura. Thank you. I've got 5 kids too. Thank you for what you do. Look, the LNP is going to take a policy election to allow young people to access their own super, to buy their own home, as well as invest $5 billion trying to open up more land for housing. I think getting young people into housing as early as possible is one of the keys, not the only one, but one of the keys to help bring our birth rate up, because the longer it takes to get your first home normally means most people will delay their first child. And if they delay their first child, it will often mean they have fewer children than they might otherwise want to, because eventually you can't have more kids at some age. So I think that is absolutely key, and it's atrocious right now how long it takes for young Australians to save for a deposit. Some even have given up owning their home, and that's going to do enormous damage to family formation. So that's on the ballot. I think it'll be more effective than what Labor's offering. I am also separately pushing for other policies that I can't promise you will come in, but I'll keep fighting for them. I think what Hungary's done is excellent, and without, in my limited time going through all of their policies, one thing I really like, again connected to the housing market, is in Hungary you can get a roughly $50,000 loan, low-interest loan, to buy your first home when you're newly married. If you have a first child, you get 3 years of no repayments. Second child, you get a third of the loan written off. And if you have a third child, you get the whole loan written off. I love that policy because it sets up such an incentive for young people to both get into a home, take that interest-free loan, and then once they've got it, they've got a big incentive. In Hungary, about 50,000. I think it might need to be more in Australia because of our high house prices, but they've got a big incentive to have 3 kids. And if we can get more people having 3 kids, that birth rate of 1.5 will rise very quickly.
Laura in Rockhampton, thanks so much for your call. We do have to wrap things up here. Senator Matt Canavan, our special guest through this past hour, not afraid to take his Christian faith into the rough and tumble debate in the Senate, and he's not up for re-election this coming election. Another 3 years to go. Matt Canavan, for listeners, if they wanted to connect with you, I guess via your office in Rockhampton in central Queensland would be the way that we could point listeners to connect with you. But
yeah, directly you can do that. You can follow me online, and I do more on X these days. As I said earlier, I like the fact there's freedom of speech there. So Matt J. Can, M-A-T-T J. Can on X. But yeah, feel free to reach out to my office. We always get back to you. We've got great people in there. Very lucky to have great staff.
Matt Canavan, thanks so much for joining us and for sharing your heart in your faith perspectives too around some of these political issues. But appreciate you being with us today on 2020.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.